Have you ever felt like you're holding everything together, but no one notices? Maybe it's because you learned to handle everything on your own. Before you were ready, have you ever felt like you're the one who always solves everything, but nobody really notices? You're the one everyone turns to when there's a problem. But when things settle down, you almost disappear from the picture. You don't complain. You don't brag. You don't need recognition. But deep down, you know you're carrying a lot. If that sounds familiar, then it's very possible you belong to a special generation. A generation that grew up without anyone applauding. My name is Philex, and I spend too much time thinking about the psychology of Gen X, raised without applause. If you are someone whose past abandonment and self-reliance have created a powerful but scary psychological system, remember to subscribe and like this video if it helps you. Look, we live in an era obsessed with labels. Everything must fit into a category, a narrative, a headline. Boomers? They ruined the economy. Millennials? Apparently, they killed entire industries. Gen Z? Addicted to screens. No attention span. Always online. It's almost comforting, isn't it? To point at a group and assign them a role. A villain. A victim. A punchline. But here's the problem. There's a generation sitting right in the middle of all this noise. And almost nobody is talking about them. Not seriously. Not deeply. Not in a way that understands them. That generation is Gen X. And this is what most people don't realize. Gen X didn't disappear. They just never asked to be seen. While the world argues, complains, and performs, they quietly keep everything running. They're the managers who don't need to announce authority. The engineers who fix problems before anyone notices them. The parents who show up without turning it into a story. The leaders who don't chase attention, only results. They don't demand recognition. They don't broadcast their struggles. They don't build identities around being heard. And ironically, that's exactly why they've become invisible. Now here's where it gets even more interesting. Gen X helped build the digital world you're living in right now. The early internet, the systems, the infrastructure, the transition from analog to digital. They were there, quietly laying the foundation. And yet, they're the least present on social media. They built the stage, but I chose not to stand on it. Sounds contradictory? Yeah, it is. But it's not an accident. It's psychology. Let me show you where it begins. Picture this. It's 1978. You're 8 years old. School just ended, and you're walking home alone. No texts. No calls. No, I'll be there in 5 minutes. Just you and the sound of your own footsteps. You reach your front door. You don't knock. Don't wait. You reach under your shirt, pull out a small key hanging around your neck, and you let yourself in. The house is empty. No parents. No babysitter. No instructions waiting for you. No one is asking how your day was. Just silence. Thick, uninterrupted silence. You drop your bag. Maybe you pour yourself a bowl of cereal. Maybe you turn on the TV, just for noise, not even for the show. And then, you wait. Not for entertainment. Not for distraction. You wait for time to pass. Now, you might be thinking, okay, but that's just one story, right? No. By 1984, over 7 million children in the U.S. between the ages of 5 and 13 were regularly left unsupervised after school. 7 million. Let that sink in. This wasn't rare. It wasn't unusual. It wasn't even considered a problem. It was normal. And this is where things start to get really interesting. Because when you grow up in an environment like that, your brain adapts. Fast. You learn something most people don't learn until much later. If ever, no one is coming to rescue you. Not when something breaks. Not when something goes wrong. Not when you feel confused, scared, or overwhelmed. So what do? You figure it out. You experiment. You make mistakes. You deal with the consequences. Alone. And over time, that does something profound to the way you think. Because independence, for you, wasn't a personality trait. It wasn't a mindset you chose. It was a requirement. A survival mechanism. And once your brain is wired that way, it doesn't just go away. It becomes who you are. Here's the thing. This didn't start as a mindset. It started as a situation. A very ordinary one. You come home from school. You're hungry. There's no one there. So, you open the fridge. You try to make something simple. Maybe you spill milk. Maybe you burn something. Maybe you break a glass. And in that moment, there's no one to call. No one to fix it. No one to soften the mistake. You just stand there, looking at the mess you created, knowing one thing, you must deal with it. So you clean it up. Or you try to hide it. Or you sit there, thinking, what's going to happen when they find out? And that's where it begins. That quiet calculation. That small voice in your head asking, how bad is this going to be? Now fast forward. You're a little older. Maybe 10, maybe 12. You want to go outside, but there's no one to ask. So, you make the call yourself. Is this safe? How long can I be gone? What if something happens? No one teaches you how to think like that. You just learn, because you must. Or maybe it's something even smaller. You forgot to do something important. Homework, a chore, a responsibility. And when your parents come home, there's no long discussion. No, let's talk about how you feel. Just a consequence. Clear, direct, final. And after a few of those moments, something shifts inside you. You stop making decisions casually. You start thinking ahead. So now, before you do anything, your brain quietly runs a checklist. If I say this, how will they react? If I choose this, what could go wrong? If this fails, what's my backup? Not out loud, not dramatically, just in the background, all the time. And here's the part most people misunderstand. From the outside, it looks like overthinking, like you're too cautious, too guarded, too serious. But that's not what it feels like on the inside. On the inside, it feels like responsibility. Like you've seen what happens when things go wrong, and no one is there to catch you. This is what most people don't realize. Gen X didn't become independent because it sounded good. They became independent because there was no alternative. And independence, at that level, comes with a cost. You become the person who plans, the one who prepares, the one who doesn't rely on luck. Because deep down, you learned very early, if you don't think ahead, you pay for it. So no, it's not anxiety. It's memory. It's experience. It's every small moment where you had to figure things out on your own, stacked on top of each other, until your brain stopped asking for help and started anticipating everything. And even now, years later, in meetings, in relationships, in life, you're still that person. The one who sees the problem before it happens. The one who quietly prepares for what others don't even notice yet. Not because you want to, but because, at some point in your life, you had no other choice. Here's something most people don't fully understand. For Gen X, distrust didn't come from theory. It came from watching, from noticing things no one explained, but everyone felt. Maybe you remember this. Your father, or someone you knew, left the house at the same time every morning. Same routine, same company, same quiet belief. If I work hard enough, this will take care of us. 30 years, sometimes more. No complaints, no shortcuts, just consistency. And then one day, everything changed. A meeting, a letter, a restructuring. And just like that, it was over. No ceremony, no loyalty returned. Just a sentence that sounded corporate and clean. We appreciate your service. And that was it. Or maybe it wasn't your parents. Maybe it was your friend's family. The sudden divorce. The house that got sold. The way everything that once looked stable quietly fell apart. No warning. No roadmap. Just adults trying to hold things together, while clearly not knowing how. And as a kid, you didn't have the words for it. But you noticed. You noticed the tension at dinner. You noticed the late-night conversations behind closed doors. You noticed that security wasn't as solid as it looked. This is where it begins. Not loudly, not dramatically, but slowly. A shift in belief. You stop assuming things will last. You stop trusting promises at face value, because you've already seen how easily they break. This is what most people don't realize. Gen X didn't grow up rejecting the system. They grew up watching the system fail the people they depended on. And that leaves a mark. So, when it comes to work, they don't romanticize it. They don't believe in one company for life, because they've seen exactly how that story ends. Instead, they think differently, quietly, practically. If this disappears tomorrow, what do I have left? If this company lets me go, what can I rely on? And when it comes to money, it's not just about earning. It's about not depending too much on anything fragile. Multiple income streams, skills over titles, flexibility over stability. Not because it's trendy, but because, at some point, stability proved unreliable. Now, someone might say, that sounds cynical. But it doesn't feel like cynicism from the inside. It feels like clarity, like you've seen behind the curtain. And once you see it, you can't understand it. So, you move through life a little differently. You work hard, but you don't expect loyalty back. You care, but you keep a part of yourself protected. You hope, but you always have a backup plan. Because deep down, you learned something early that others might learn much later. Systems don't guarantee safety. People don't always stay. And promises, no matter how sincere they sound, don't always hold. And that realization, it didn't make you weak. It made you careful. It makes you adaptable. It made you someone who doesn't collapse when things fall apart. Because, in a quiet way, you've been preparing for that possibility your whole life. If you really want to understand Gen X, don't start with what they say. Start with how they make money. Because that's where the truth shows up. Maybe this feels familiar. You've never been completely comfortable relying on just one paycheck. Even if the job looks stable. Even if the company seems solid. Even if everything on paper says you're safe. There's always that quiet thought in the back of your mind. What if this disappears? And you don't say it out loud. You just prepare. So maybe you've done things like this. You kept a second source of income, even when you didn't need it yet. You learned a skill on the side. Something practical. Something you could fall back on. Not for passion. Not for branding. Just in case. Maybe you fixed things for people. Sold something small. Took on extra work quietly. Not to impress anyone, but to make sure you were never completely exposed. Or maybe you've had this experience. Watching someone lose their job and realizing how fast everything changes. 1 month, everything is normal. Next month, they're cutting expenses, rewriting plans, starting over. And you think to yourself, I never want to be in that position without options. This is what most people don't realize. For Gen X, financial thinking isn't driven by ambition. It's driven by memory. By moments where stability proved temporary. So when people talk about side hustles today, it sounds new, modern, almost trendy. But for you, it's not a trend. It's a reflex. You've been doing it long before it had a name. Because you never fully trusted the idea of one path. You don't just think, how do I earn more? You think, how do I stay secure if something breaks? How do I stay useful if this role disappears? What can I rely on if everything else shifts? And that leads to a very different way of moving through life. You value skills more than titles. Because titles can be taken away. Skills stay with you. You focus on adaptability more than comfort. Because comfort can disappear overnight. Adaptability travels with you. Now, someone on the outside might look at this and think, why not just relax? Why not trust the process? But that's easy to say when you haven't seen the process fail. Because for you, this isn't about being paranoid. It's about being prepared. It's about quietly building options. So you're never stuck waiting for someone else to decide your future. And here's where it gets even more interesting. You don't talk about this much. You don't post about your grind. You don't label yourself as an entrepreneur. You just do what needs to be done. Because deep down, you understand something that many people are only starting to realize now. Income is temporary. Security is constructed. And the more ways you can support yourself, the less power any single system has over you. So no, it's not that you don't believe in success. You just don't believe in depending on one version of it. And that quiet habit of building multiple paths, of never putting everything in one place, of always having a backup plan. It's not fear. It's strategy. A strategy you didn't learn from books, but from watching what happens when people don't have one. Have you ever noticed this? There's always that one person. When things start falling apart, they don't panic. They don't talk much. They just handle it. Quietly. Deadlines collapsing. People confused. Energy everywhere. And somehow, they step in, slow everything down, and fix what matters. Not perfectly, but effectively. And when is it over? No story. No spotlight. No, look what I did. They just go back to normal. If that's you, let's be honest. You don't even think that's impressive. Because in your mind, that's what you're supposed to do. Think about this. A real moment. Something breaks at work. Badly. The kind of problem that makes everyone else freeze, overthink, or wait for direction. You don't. You sit down. You look at it long enough to understand it. And then you start fixing it. One piece at a time. No noise. No performance. Just focus. Hours later, it's done. Crisis avoided. No one really knows how bad it could have been. Except you. And the next day, someone says, hey, I heard you handled that. Nice. And almost automatically, you say, yeah, it was nothing. But here's the part that hits deeper. It wasn't anything. You just don't experience it as something worth talking about. Because you were never trained to see effort as something special. You were trained to see it as baseline. Growing up, You didn't get praised for doing things right. You noticed when things went wrong. So, your brain adapted. Very quiet. Very early. You stopped asking, will anyone recognize this? And started asking, did I do it right? That shift changes everything. Because now, your standard isn't external. It's internal. You don't need applause to confirm your value. You measure it yourself. In private. Without noise. And here's where most people get it wrong about you. They think you're not ambitious. They think you don't care about recognition. They think you're just quiet. But they don't see what's actually happening. You've just seen enough to know this. Recognition is inconsistent. Sometimes it shows up. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes the loudest person gets the credit. Sometimes the one who carried everything gets nothing. So at some point, without announcing it, without even fully realizing it, you decided, I'm not building my identity on that. And that decision, that's power. Real power. Because now, you can keep going when others stop. You can stay consistent when motivation disappears. You can deliver results without needing validation to fuel you. You've built something most people are still chasing, self-contained value. And yeah, from the outside, it looks like you don't show off. Like you're holding back. Like you're invisible. But that's not what's happening. Not really. You're just not performing. You're operating. And maybe that's the real difference. Not that you have less to prove, but that you stop needing the world to confirm it. Now, you might be thinking, okay, but why are they so quiet online? Why don't they post more? Why don't they share what they're doing, what they've achieved, what they feel? The answer is simpler than it looks, but also deeper than most people expect. Because they remember something most people don't anymore. A world where your mistakes didn't follow you forever. Picture this. You're a teenager. You say something awkward. You wear something embarrassing. You make a bad decision. And yeah, people notice. Maybe a few friends laugh. Maybe it becomes a story for a week. And then, it fades. It disappears. It stays in that moment. No screenshots. No reposts. No digital trail waiting to resurface years later. That was normal. Making mistakes and being allowed to outgrow them. Quietly. Now compare that to today. One post. One comment. One wrong tone. And suddenly, it's permanent. Searchable. Shareable. Amplified. This is where the tension begins. Because for Gen X, sharing doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like exposure. Maybe you've felt this before. You're about to post something. Nothing controversial. Just a thought. An opinion. A moment from your life. And then something stops you. A small hesitation. Who's going to see this? How will this be interpreted? Do I really want this out there? So you don't post it. You keep it to yourself. Not because you're hiding, but because you understand something instinctively. Not everything needs to be public to be real. This is what most people don't realize. Gen X didn't grow up documenting their lives. They grew up living them. Moments weren't content. They were just moments. And here's the quiet truth behind it all. It's not that they don't understand social media. They do. In many ways, they help build the systems behind it. But understanding something doesn't mean trusting it. Because once you've experienced a world where privacy was the default, it's hard to feel comfortable in a world where exposure is the expectation. So they watch, they scroll, they observe, but they rarely step fully into the spotlight. And then, here's the part that hits deeper. It's not just about privacy. It's about control. Control over what people know about you. Control over how much of your life is visible. Control over what stays yours and what becomes public. Because somewhere in their memory, there's a quiet understanding. The less people know, the safer you are. So no, it's not fear. It's not disconnected. And it's not inability. It's a choice. A very deliberate one. To keep some parts of life untouched, unrecorded, unshared. Because for them, the most valuable moments were never meant to go viral. They were meant to be lived, and then gently let go. Here's something you don't hear often. Gen X doesn't talk about the grind. They don't post quotes about discipline. They don't announce how hard they're working. They just work. Maybe this feels familiar. You wake up early, not because it's inspiring, but because something needs to get done. No music, no motivation speech, just responsibility. Or think back. Your first job wasn't about passion. It wasn't about finding yourself. It was simple. You wanted money. So you worked. Paper routes at 12. Stacking shelves. Washing dishes. Long hours, small pay, no applause. And here's the moment that stays with you. You finish a long day. You're tired. Maybe no one even notices. No one says, good job. But you look at what you earned, and something inside your clicks. Quietly, I can take care of myself. That feeling? It never leaves. So later in life, work isn't something you perform. It's something you do. You don't need to prove you're working hard. You just make sure things get handled. And from the outside, people might miss it. They might think you're not ambitious, not driven, not hungry enough, but they're looking for noise in someone who was trained in silence. Because for you, work was never an identity. It was survival first, then responsibility, then habit. And here's the truth that hits deeper. You don't chase recognition, but you notice who shows up and who doesn't. You don't talk about effort, but you respect it when you see it. So no, it's not that you lack ambition. It's that you don't need to broadcast it. You just show up. You do the work. And when it's done, you move on to the next thing. No noise. No performance. Just results. Let's be honest for a second. That whole "I don't care" attitude, it's not always what it looks like. You say it casually. Whatever. It doesn't matter. Do what you want. But there's a moment, very small, very quick, right before you say it, where you do care. You just decide not to show it. Maybe it's in a conversation. Someone says something slightly off. Not wrong enough to argue, but not right either. You notice it. You feel it. And then, you let it go. Or someone disappoints you. Not dramatically. Just enough to confirm something you already suspected. And instead of reacting, you lean back. Small nod. Yeah, figures. That's the shift. Not from caring not caring, but from expecting no longer expecting. This is where it gets uncomfortable. Because over time, that habit spreads. You stop reacting to small things, then medium things, then even the things that should matter. And from the outside, you look calm, unbothered, easygoing. But inside, you've just lowered the expectation. Quietly, without announcing it. That's why Gen X humor feels different. Dry, sarcastic, a little detached. Because underneath it, there's a pattern. I've seen enough to know how this usually ends. And here's the real twist. It's not about hiding emotion. It's about managing disappointment before it arrives. So instead of hoping too much, you stay neutral. Instead of reacting too strongly, you keep it contained. Because at some point, you learn that showing how much you care gives the situation power over you. So, you say, "I don't care." Not because it's true, but because it's safer. And maybe that's the part no one talks about. Not the independence, not the strength, but the quiet trade-off. You protected yourself so well that sometimes you don't even let yourself feel things fully anymore. Here's something subtle, but incredibly revealing. Gen X doesn't ask for help, but they will show up for you every single time. If this is you, you probably recognize the pattern. You'd rather figure things out on your own, even when it's hard, even when it would be easier to ask. There's always that instinct. I'll handle it. But then, someone else is in trouble. A friend calls late. My coworker is overwhelmed. A family member doesn't know what to do. And suddenly, you're there. No hesitation. No overthinking. You help. No announcement. No "look at me." No need to be seen doing it. You just show up. So what's going on here? Why the difference? It goes back further than most people realize. Back to a time when you didn't have many adults around. Not consistently. Not in the moments that mattered. So, you found your people. Friends who stayed after school. Friends who know your routine. Friends who were there when no one else was. Those weren't just friendships. They were support systems. Quiet, unspoken ones. You shared food, time, space, sometimes even silence. And in that space, something formed. Not dependency, but trust. A kind of loyalty that didn't need words. If something goes wrong, I've got you. And that stayed with you even now. So, when it comes to yourself, you rely inward. You solve things alone. You don't like feeling like a burden. But when it comes to others, you become the safety net you never had. And here's the part that hits deeper. You don't help people to be appreciated. You help because, somewhere in your memory, you know what it feels like when no one shows up. So, you make sure someone does. That's the paradox. You don't need anyone. But people can depend on you. And maybe that's one of the most defining traits of Gen X. Not loud loyalty. Not performative kindness. But the kind that shows up quietly. Right when it matters most. Here's where things get quietly intense. Gen X doesn't respond to authority the way people expect. They don't challenge it loudly. They don't blindly follow it either. They evaluate it. Maybe you've felt this before. You walk into a meeting. Someone has the title, the position, the authority. They speak with confidence. But as they talk, Something feels off. Not wrong enough to call out, but not solid enough to trust. And in that moment, you don't react. You don't argue. You don't make a scene. You just adjust. You listen. You observe. And quietly, in your head, you're thinking, can they actually handle this? Because for you, titles don't mean much. You've seen too many people with authority who didn't know what they were doing. Maybe it was a boss who made decisions that didn't make sense. Maybe it was a manager who talked well, but couldn't execute. Maybe it was someone promoted for reasons that had nothing to do with skill. And after enough of those experiences, something changes. You stop assuming leadership equals competence. So now, you watch for something else. Clarity, consistency, capability. If someone has it, you'll follow them. No ego, no resistance, fully committed. But if they don't, you don't rebel. You don't confront. You do something far more subtle. You compensate. You fix what they miss. You handle what they can't. You make sure things don't fall apart, even if it's not your responsibility. And over time, without noise, without politics, without attention, you become the one people rely on. This is what most people don't notice. Gen X doesn't fight authority. They quietly replace weak authority with competence. No speeches, no declarations, just results. And here's the part that hits deeper. This isn't about ego. It's about standards. Because once you've seen what bad leadership costs, you stop tolerating it. Not emotionally, practically. So no, it's not disrespect. A thought that lingers too long. And suddenly, you feel it. Everything you've been holding, right there. Not overwhelming, just undeniable. And for a second, you realize something you rarely admit. You've been doing a lot. On your own. For a very long time. Yes, it's strength. But not the kind people talk about. Because strength, without being seen, starts to feel like isolation. You become the one everyone relies on, but rarely the one who leans on anyone. And that space, between being needed and being understood, that's where loneliness lives. Quiet, steady, always there. Because underneath all of it, there's still something human, something simple. To be seen, to be understood, to not have to carry everything alone, even just once. There's something quietly remarkable about Gen X. They remember a world that no longer exists, and they helped build the one we live in now. Maybe this feels familiar. You remember waiting for a song on the radio, waiting for someone to call, waiting without knowing exactly when the answer would come. Information wasn't instant. Connection wasn't constant. And somehow, that made everything feel a little more real. Then everything changed. Computers have become normal. The internet appeared. Slow at first, uncertain, but full of possibility. And you were there, not just watching it happen, figuring it out, adapting to it, building with it. You learned the old way first. How to be patient, how to solve problems without shortcuts, how to sit with uncertainty. Then you learned the new way, how to move faster, how to navigate systems, how to work inside a world that never stops updating. This is what most people don't realize. You didn't just experience change. You translated it. You understand what it means to live without technology. And what it means depends on it. You can disconnect, but you can also adapt. And that creates something rare, a kind of balance most people don't even notice. Because to those who came before you, the modern world can feel overwhelming, too fast, too complex. And to those who came after, the old world is almost impossible to imagine, too slow, too disconnected. But you stand in between. You can explain one side to the other. You can move between both without losing yourself. And that's why the metaphor matters. You are the bridge. And here's the part no one really says out loud. Bridges don't get celebrated. People don't stop to admire them every day. They don't thank them. They don't even think about them. They just use them to get from one side to the other. But without that bridge, nothing connects. Nothing flows. Nothing moves forward. So if you've ever felt overlooked, like your role isn't fully seen, like you're carrying more than people realize, maybe it's not because you don't matter. Maybe it's because you're doing something essential, so consistently, that people forget to notice it. You hold things together, quietly, reliably, without needing attention. And maybe that's the most defining thing about Gen X. Not what they say, not what they show, but what do they make possible for everyone else? Here's the part that stays with you. Bridges don't get applause. No one stops in the middle just to admire them. No one says, "This changed everything for me." They just walk across. They move on. They get where they need to go. And they forget what made it possible. And if you've ever felt that, like you're the one holding things together at work, in your family, in relationships, but no one really sees it, then you already understand this. Because being the bridge means being essential and invisible at the same time. But here's the truth most people miss. Just because something isn't celebrated doesn't mean it isn't valuable. Without the bridge, nothing connects, nothing moves, nothing progresses. So if you're Gen X, or if you're just now beginning to understand them, remember this: you don't need recognition to have value. But that doesn't mean you don't deserve it. And maybe it's time that to change. If something in this video felt familiar, if it made you pause for a second, then don't just scroll past it. Take a moment. Send this to someone you know, a parent, a colleague, a friend, someone who has always been there, without asking for anything back. Because sometimes, the people who say the least carry the most. And sometimes, a simple acknowledgement is more powerful than applause. If you want more content like this, quiet insights, real psychology, the kind that actually makes you see things differently, hit like, subscribe, and stay with me. Because there's a lot more beneath the surface. And we're just getting started.